First things first, are you motion sick?
No, no, I'm not. But I was thinking that would be the most insane, like roller coaster ever. So,
Yeah,
that was a pretty fun loading screen.
absolutely. Yeah. So we've got Evan Stewart on today. Evan you've been my own personal business consultant, business coach for the last almost 5 years. Is that right?
Yeah, something like that. It's been a minute. It's been a fun
Yeah.
time though.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I appreciate you being able to hop on. For those that notice, we are cropped a little closer today. There's uh, a pre-generated background, if you will, that Kyle makes for us. He couldn't make it last minute. Luckily, Evan was able to make it last minute, and so we've cropped that down. Hopefully, hopefully that's not too tight of a crop for you guys. But man, what's new with you? How are things going?
It's going well. It's going well. I was thinking this morning. Actually, it's funny because what's new is a lot of work, and
Sure.
it's not a lot of thought and boredom. There was a book that I read recently by Michael Easter. Well, he actually had just come out with another book that I thought was really interesting, but he was talking about this concept of boredom and
Mhm.
the importance of allowing your mind to kind of wander a little bit, and brought up some of these studies that there are like two groups that were solving problems, and one would take some time to think about the problem, and then literally be bored, like actually feel that physical sensation of boredom and
Sure.
so to speak, thoughtlessness. And it's kind of like, for my computer nerds out there, it's like a caching system for your mind, where sometimes you have to refresh your cache because you just get bogged down other than sleep. And the group that experienced boredom almost 100% of the time would show consistently better thought patterns,
Mhm.
better ways to actually solve problems, more creativity. Anyway, I say all of that because this morning I was literally thinking about that statement of like, well, what have I been
Sure.
up to? Well, a lot of work. And you know what? I think I'm going to try and be bored a
Yeah.
little more often, right? And
Yeah.
so,
No doubt.
I don't know, kind of a long run around a short walk type of answer, but that's been on my mind lately. Is
Yeah.
is having nothing on my mind, if that
Sure.
makes sense.
Well, you know what's funny about that is I remember back in our early days of consulting, I'm talking like November, December 2018,
Hmm. Hmm.
on into 19 and 20. And which this is like so the opposite of what we take in and what we see on social media. But
Yeah. Yeah.
you would tell me and we used to talk a lot. I
Hmm.
mean, which is what you were there for.
That's right. That's
But
right.
we talked a lot, and I would share everything with you for no other reason than wanting, of course, to find answers. I had a lot of questions. I wanted to be further along in my career than I was, which is why I hired you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I know you don't do that anymore, in particular, at least taking on new one-on-one clients, but
Right.
unless it's very, very specific and special. But that being said, all that you said takes me back to when I would tell you, man, today sucks. Today's not going great.
Hmm.
You would say,
Hmm.
stop, just quit, just go
Yeah.
home.
Yeah.
And the thought of taken out of context, the thought of just quit, just come back and do it again tomorrow. For a lot of people, especially out of context, is
Yeah.
you're telling me to like stop pushing? Like, aren't we supposed to be like these David Goggins-esque, like push through the BS and work these insane amount of hours? And so it seemed and felt really counterintuitive. And I was not good. I was not good at doing that right out of the gate. And then I learned, and I don't do it often. It's maybe 2 or 3 times a year, it seems. But sometimes I just get to what feels like a roadblock, and I'm like, yeah, screw this. I'm going home. Like,
Yeah.
and it's not throwing in the towel. I'm going to come back and tackle that tomorrow.
Right.
But I'm done today. Like physically,
Right.
emotionally, mentally, I'm done. And I
Right.
remember that being really instrumental in my growth, honestly, which ties back to the go and be bored. That wasn't really the goal whenever you said go home,
Right.
as much
Right.
as it was just like go chill out for a second. But I can see how those would connect. And I don't know, that struck a chord with me. So I wanted to bring that up because that was important.
Well, I think more people need to, we always think about things that we're going to start and things we're going to do, but we rarely think about things that we're going to quit. And
Sure.
to your point, the greatest athletes in the world prioritize rest. And if you think about your work as a professional, I know a lot of, you work with a lot of professionals, and a lot of professionals are here listening to this call. And so I'm speaking kind of generally to the audience. Like, if you're thinking about your work as a professional, as maintaining a really high level of athleticism, whether it's mental, it might be physical for some of you, right? Construction is not a very behind the desk type of job for the people that are actually out there building things. But
Right.
if you think about what you're doing is maintaining a really high level of athleticism, and you don't prioritize rest in that, then what you're doing is you're just being really foolish, honestly. And it's about, when I say things that we need to quit, I'm talking specifically about quitting the over processing and the over compute mentally, to where you're not actually getting to a goal. You're just kind of grinding your way through. And there's a time and a place for brute force. Like, if you've just got so much on your plate that you have to work that really long day, and you have to work maybe quite a few of those, that's very different than falling into like the hustle culture of, well, which I think, even speaking for both of us, we've kind of both fallen into that in the past. I know I've fallen into that of like, this is what hard work looks like.
Sure.
And I remember one of the points where that changed for me was, I would be grinding away, these 80, 100-hour weeks, and for like weeks and weeks and weeks and months and months and months on end. And then I would look at some other people in my network who would work like, I don't know, 20 hours a week.
Sure.
And there's this one person in particular that I remember at the time, and I'm not a person in comparison, but what I mean by this statement is not a comparative statement, but just highlighting something in my life. Was I was working like all these hours, and he was working, essentially part-time, and he was
Not all
making
these
like
hours.
8x, 10x, 12x what I was making. I was like, oh, that's really interesting.
Sure.
But he wasn't subscribed to this like hustle culture. He worked really, really hard because that was his nature, and then he rested. And it was kind of interesting, to your point of prioritizing rest. It's super important. Super important.
I went through that as well, and it wasn't so much like, well, so and so can make X amount a year, and I know they don't do what I do, right? Again, not a comparison thing, but I kind of leaned into the fact that, I don't have to be on 24/7. Matter of fact, that is exhausting. So, pointed question on the hot seat, something you posted on Twitter. Actually, you retweeted it. I don't actually know. Okay. So and we've not talked about this. I don't actually know if it was sarcasm from you.
Okay.
And not so much mockery, because that's not who you are, but I don't know if it was sarcasm or if there was complete and total truth or ounces of truth. But you had retweeted someone that had said, I don't even know if it was in technology, but essentially, you need to come work 10 hours a day, 7 days a week for 4 months. I forget the end of it, but essentially it equated to, you're going to have 3 meals a day provided, 10 hours a day, 7 days a week for 3 to 4 months. And then by about month 6, and maybe this is too fluffy now, but like by about month 6, you're going to end up making potentially more money than you've made in the last couple of years. And I think that was in the vein of technology. But ultimately, question for you, was that sarcasm after your last statement and last discussion of taking rest and all of that, or was that true?
So I know exactly what you're talking about. For those that are listening, it was not sarcasm, which I know makes me sound like a walking contradiction, but I'll expand on that.
Yeah, no, that's why I asked. I knew you would have a very...
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, so first and foremost, when I'm talking about prioritizing rest, I'm not talking about being lazy. I'm talking about understanding when you've hit a limit and ensuring that you're not grinding yourself down. But more importantly is maintaining your peak performance, which means understanding your limits and getting right to them and then stopping.
Sure.
And then doing that again and again and again for a long period of time. Right.
Sure. So the first obedience and the long obedience in the same direction.
That's right. That's exactly right. So, but in this example, so I retweeted a tweet by Nikita Beer. And what he was saying is the way, if he was launching a new social app nowadays, what he would do is he would hire, a handful of engineers, and he wouldn't give them anything except double-digit equity, which in the tech world is a big deal because most equity is, a fraction of a point or a few points, like single digit at best. In fact, a lot of founders, when they IPO, own like 9% of the company, 9 to 15%. And so having double-digit equity is huge. Basically what the tweet said is, it was just kind of him pontificating. If I were going to do this again, I would hire a few world-class people. Wouldn't give you anything except equity because I want you to understand that every hour you're not working is costing you $10,000. And we would bust ass for 4 months, just
Sure.
completely wall to wall every day for a few months. And it either works or it doesn't. And I'll take care of your housing or meals or whatever it was, maybe not housing, but it was something like I'll take care of basically
Yeah.
what you need. And
Sure.
we're going to go run really hard. And then if this works, then you're going to end up making more money than you would have ever made in your entire life. And if it doesn't work, then you had an incredible experience and you got to work with me. Now, some of you are thinking like, wow, that's pretty audacious, but this dude has done this twice now and built 2 apps that got to number 1 in the App Store and then sold them for what was at least 2 8-figure exits. One of them might have been 9-figure exits and is commonly known as the king of consumer apps. So,
What apps were they?
The first one I think was called TBH and the second one was called Gas. They are a teen polling app where you can like rate friends and chat with other teens in your school system and whatnot, like a perfect example of like going niche. But his last app last year, he built it, scaled it to millions of dollars in revenue a month, and exited. Now, I don't know the number, but based on his revenue and multiples at the time, we can estimate to be about $50 million, and the entire process in like 6 months. So
that is just bizarre to me. Sorry, go ahead.
Right.
I've got a question, but go ahead.
No. But to your point, so what he was saying is like, hey, if I were to do it again, I would do this again. And so a technologist who's good and would be wanting to do that, you might go, hey, I'm going to give this a shot. And if I win, if we win together, which is a pretty good bet because this has already happened twice with this guy. If we win together, then I can like literally have a lottery ticket in my pocket. And if we don't, then I got the chance to work with Nikita, which would be like saying essentially in that sphere, Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook or Meta, right? So to your first point, was that sarcasm? No. But the contradiction that some people see is working like that invalidates rest.
Sure.
And it does if that's the only window of time that you're looking at. When I'm talking about rest and work, at least for me personally, what I'm talking about is building rest into your day-to-day, right? So a huge thing for me is once a week, I'll take 4 to 6 hours in an evening and not work that evening. That's a really big thing to me because I'm not good at taking time.
Well, yeah, because you're going to work from 4 to 11 today. I've already talked to you and you've been working all day.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. And so, but there's these really big sprints of time. There's times and place for it. And so it's kind of like, if we're in fall, we're getting into the end of the year. We're going to start seeing like, turkey trots and marathons and stuff like that. Like if in another 60 days, you're going to run a marathon, or in 6 months, you're going to start training for that. And then when you're running the marathon, you're not going to be thinking, oh my gosh, this is so hard. You're going to be thinking, this is what I trained for. Sure. I know there's a definite start, middle, and end to this process.
Yep.
And I happen to be in the middle of it.
Right.
And that's kind of the season that I think Nikita was talking about as it relates to that tweet, but definitely contradictory on the surface.
Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, and I knew you would have an answer. I knew to take you at your word and serious, on Twitter. I had a feeling that would be very true, but that's really cool. Really cool. And so what would that look like for a realtor or a lender as we are moving into 2024? We're now into October. What does that look like, right? We've got the market kind of pulling the strings over here with interest rates, and we've got seasonality coming. We've got holidays. We've got business planning for 2024, which should be happening right now, not in the last week of December. What does that look like?
I mean, the thought that comes to mind initially is that a few thoughts, actually. That's a good question. So the first and foremost is that a lot of business planning as a solopreneur, right? Solo entrepreneur, which is what you are if you're a lender or an agent of any form or fashion. If you're an independent contractor, you're a solopreneur. You're a business owner that happens to have an employee count of 1+, not just like you're not responsible for you, you alone. Like that thought process is key. So, but what a lot of this comes down to, like I'm planning for next year, is like operational stuff. I'm going to be more efficient here. I'm going to do some marketing here. Like that's all operational. And it actually doesn't mean anything at the surface level, because operational governance really is around the management and the expansion of things that work. So if you're in a situation like that and you have, you've got a great pipeline, you've got a great clip, you've got endurance in the market, you've been around long enough to where you already have an established name. So even things like high interest rates affect you, but not as much as other people. Like if you're in that place, governance on how you manage that and how you protect that is going to be really, really key.
Sure.
But not everybody's in that place. And so I'm brought back to the thought of Johnny Ive, who was the renowned developer at Apple, designer, excuse me, at Apple, that designed things like the iPhone that we love.
Sure.
What Johnny had said, he said a quote that stuck with me, is that there's nothing inherently like new is not inherently good. Inherently better is what people are looking for, right? There's nothing inherent. The statement was there's no inherent value in new. There is inherent value in better. That's what I was trying to communicate. There's inherent value in better. And so if you think about agency, like there are hundreds of thousands of real estate agents in this market. There are millions of real estate agents all around the United States and even around the world. And so wherever you're listening in from, and same can be said about lending and insurance, is that the first thing first is that you're in an industry where you're one of many, right?
Sure.
Which can be good and it can be poor. It's good because there are standards that are already set, and it's poor because that there are some standards that you will be judged by that you may or may not fall into, right?
Sure.
But the thought process is that there's inherent value in better, not inherent value in new. So I'm this agent. Okay, you're one of many. So then the following process goes into business planning is how can you inherently be better, which is a little bit of an arbitrary statement, but that brings in thoughts on like, there's a book I love called Unreasonable Hospitality. I recommend every single business owner that cares about people should read it. Should be essential reading. It is one of the few books that I say absolutely will read it. When I hire more employees, it'll be the first thing they need to read immediately into the company. Unreasonable Hospitality, like amazing. So in a service-based industry, like hospitality is really important.
Sure.
People work with people because they want to be taken care of, not because they just want to pick up the phone and have another discussion with another person.
Right.
So going into the business planning, like what would I be focused on and what would I recommend focusing on is that concept of inherently better. And inherently better means upon improving upon the things and maybe the frustration that got you into the industry in the first place to try and fix it, and really doubling down and building conviction on that, instead of just the governance of like operations, because that's what a lot of business planning looks like. You know, calendar here, and we'll do this event here, but that entire process should happen very quickly. And governing your operational efficiency as a business is really not like expansion plan, market penetration, that type of thing that matters, especially in down markets.
Sure. And so as agents enter the new year, your thought would be focusing on the processes to manage the business. Is that right?
Yeah. So the thought would be, So the first thought would be really finding a bone to pick, honestly. Like find your Goliath. And that's what you need to go after in the industry. So one of the problems
Are you talking real quick, Evan, like agent to agent? Like, I think this person is, or Goliath is like, this is a monumental like goal or.
Well, so that's a great question. I'll dig a little bit deeper there. I would argue that, okay, maybe the word Goliath is the wrong word. Let's replace it with boogeyman, right? Is that human nature is to fight for something and usually fight against something else. That's part of our species, the natural survival instinct we have is we need to be progressing towards and fighting and pushing against other things, right? If you think about the decision framework that you make, sometimes you'll make decisions not just because you want that decision to happen, but because you're actively not wanting another thing to happen. And that's what forced the decision. And yet when we get into business, oftentimes we'll think that, oh, we're going to be in business and we're just going to kind of aimlessly do things better. When I say like identify a boogeyman, I'm talking about, when I say a bone to pick, when I say a Goliath, I'm talking about one thing that frankly really kind of pisses you off. And I'm not being negative here. I'm saying the thing that gets you fired up, right? Like, man, I can't stand it when agents do this because of blank. I can't stand it when agents are unresponsive and when 58% of home buyers can't remember their agent's name because they weren't hospitable. And when the average real estate transaction looks like this, when I know it could look like this, and therefore I'm going to take action against that. Because what happens with a lot of agency is there's no narrative in what you do. Hey, I help people buy and sell homes. Well, great. Welcome to the club of 3 million other people. The conversation needs to be more so about, I am here because I believe this. This is where my convictions lie. Therefore, this is how I run my business. And what'll happen is two things. You will repel some and you will attract others, but the people you will attract will become advocates, not just customers. And so when I say things like find your bone to pick, find your Goliath, find your boogeyman, find your whatever word you want to throw in there, I'm talking about the one thing in the industry that you're just adamantly don't want to be a part of. You're against. This is a problem in my mind because it'll help you craft a narrative around the solution. So when I'm thinking of business planning, I'm thinking of inherently better, not inherently new. And inherently better stems from I see A, B, and C as deficiencies in the market, in service, in whatever. And because those deficiencies exist, I have a conviction and a narrative based on doing things this way. And that is what I'm going to leverage in the market as better, not just new, if that makes
Sure.
sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing you told me early on in my career is, and at that point, you also, for a short time, you were also a licensed realtor in Texas, right?
Yeah.
And so you had told me, like, you and I at the time, you and I can do the exact same job, right? You and I can open doors, we can write contracts, we can present offers, we can speak
Mhm.
with sellers, we can do all the things.
Mhm.
Um, but one thing, and this is what stuck with me for a long time and always will, is I can't duplicate your humanity and you can't duplicate my humanity. Because the
Right.
thought is, right, as we're talking through this, someone could be thinking, well, my gosh, like, how do we be different? How do we do this? How do we do that? And that reminder for me was that even though you can do, are capable of doing what I have a license to do as well. We took the
Mhm.
same test. We passed the same test. We both carry the exact same weight of
Mhm.
license. I remember one thing that stuck out was just the idea that I'm not you and they're not me. No one, the empowering thought was that no one is going to take care of my people the
Mhm.
way that I'll take care of my people. And
Yeah.
inside that chip on my shoulder, for me, I've told you this before, for me, that chip on my shoulder was I am always overcoming the cookie cutter outline of the agents that have gone before me and done a
Yeah.
crap job.
Yeah.
Because it was by those agents' actions and their doings and the way that they handled business that people now view me and say, well, you're in it for the money. You're in it for this. It's all about you. You don't care about your customers. You're
Mhm.
not going
Mhm.
to take care of me. And the list goes on.
Yep.
When in fact, I guess that was sort of my Goliath, my boogeyman, if you will, was I'm going to take unbelievable care of my people. And
Yeah.
that spider veins out to who even knows how far in terms of what solutions I put in place, what actions I take to combat that, to always
Yeah.
overcome, because that was always kind of my mantra is, I'm overcoming what someone has gone before me and done really poorly,
Yeah.
which has served me really well. It can be different for everyone. What was yours, if you don't mind me asking, because you were highly, highly successful as an agent.
For sure, for sure. That's a really good question. For those of you that don't know, the quick TLDR is I got into real estate, built up a business that became one of the top in Texas, and then sold it to an associate compass broker. And
And real quick, for those that don't know what TLDR is, too long,
oh,
didn't
too long,
read.
didn't read. Like the real quick summary
Yeah, yeah, yeah. In
is
conclusion.
in conclusion, yeah. And so and the reason why I mentioned that is because first of all, it's possible to actually build and scale and then even exit something like a service-based business. And second of all, it is in order to do so, you have to overcome a couple of really important hurdles and like landmines in the market. And the first one really is developing this conviction and narrative. And so when you ask about what was mine, there were a few. The first is I didn't like how people took care of people. And what I meant by that is that a lot of agents actually don't care. Now, perhaps not those listening to this call, because the reason they're in Academy 18 is because they care.
Sure.
But we can all, without speaking ill of others, can know as a black and white statement of fact that just most people don't care about other people, right? And I believe that if I'm working with people, that I want that to be a vested relationship, right? Landon,
Yep.
you remember the statement of like a transaction is a byproduct of a vested relationship, not the goal
Yep.
of the relationship, right? I want to be in your life, not in your wallet. And that's kind of this idea of that there's more to life than just taking other people's money.
Mhm.
And as funny as it sounds, that was a really good starting point
Mhm.
because, I mentioned earlier, like the book Unreasonable Hospitality. So I would do things like early on when I didn't have any business, I would do things like take the people who told me no out to dinner. Like, hey, Landon, you told me no, you're going to go with another agent. I'd love to buy you a steak dinner and just know all of the things that you hated about why you said no. And two things happened. One is people took me up on that because free dinner. And second of all is they just roasted me, man. It was like,
Yeah.
oh, you're too young, you're too this, you're too that. And some of that was true. Some of that
Sure.
was true. You're too inexperienced. I don't want to be a guinea pig. And it's like, well, of course I'm
Yeah.
too inexperienced because I don't have any listings, so it was like this catch 22. But But it was also real.
Sure.
Like, people don't want to place their family's most important asset in your insecurity. And if you don't have any years of experience to back it up, insecurity with that relationship is going to be something customers care about. And so I started doing these things that would allow me to understand why I was getting the response I was getting in the market. And at the same time, my boogeyman was like how people treated other people. Hospitality was a really, really big component of it. And then another one was like the quality of my product, right? So nowadays I'm in engineering. I have a software company, and the craft of the product that we produce and our design and our customer interactions now is articulated through software, but back in real estate was articulated through how we took care of people and things like listing photos, right? Like, I would easily spend $1,200 for an incredible set of listing photos for like a $500,000 house where, arguably it was way too expensive. But then what happened is that the portfolio that I, and then eventually the team that I led, started creating just looked stunning. Like, people wanted to engage it, right? We were 3, 5, 8 times longer people staying on our site than they would on traditional real estate sites because of the quality of the presentation and materials that we put out, right? We presented our presentation for any listing, right? I even did this on $100,000 listing once. It was super like a Vogue magazine almost. Like, it was a really, I think you might have even seen this. It was like a really high quality, like matte finish, professionally designed publication that would have team information and details and just little things out of the gate that would start to set apart. It wasn't about like printing materials on nicer paper. It was that the way you do one thing is the way you do all things. And we wanted our people to feel seen, heard, appreciated, and valued, and wrap them in an experience that was unparalleled from the moment that they had called us and somebody answered to the moment that we actually moved their property rather quickly. Sure. So all of that to say, but that stemmed from the first thing that you mentioned, which was that little kernel of desire to want people to feel good and to be treated well and just to do things hospitably in an industry that was often one where others took advantage of the customer. And that just wasn't one that I believed in.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, and you're still, by my standards, incredibly young, but it also probably didn't help though.
Hey, I just turned 30, so getting up there.
Hey,
but
that's up there. But to be fair, I mean, you were, aside from, well, we don't want to be a guinea pig and you're too young and you have no experience, all these things that we hear, or if we don't, we still tell ourselves that.
Sure.
It didn't help that you were luxury and ultra luxury at 21 and 22, and I mean, I remember meeting with you over the years and just so much wisdom out of, I mean, at that point, I mean, I'm still to this day 4 years older than you. And so I just remember like, man, like, this child has it together. Like, it's, I mean, you were an adult, but it was ridiculous. And I remember I was starting to talk, I mean, it's kind of going back to when I hired you as a consultant, but like,
sure.
I was talking with Amber and I was just like, I really think, matter of fact, I know, like, I'm going to go hire someone because, how old would I have been? 29 at the time. And I remember being like, it's going to cost me X. I'm fine with that. I can go spend that for the whole year, which was steep at the time. I remember you telling me, hey, I know the monthly seems maybe a bit steep. My job is to make that completely insignificant for you. Yeah. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to give it a run. Yeah. And I remember looking back at that and being like, either this person at the time, my concept on like coaching and stuff was like, either the person I hire, which ended up being you, the person I hire is either going to catapult me and fast forward me 3, 4, 5, 7, 10 years, or it's going to be a bust and I'll just call it a write-off and move on down the road. Right. Yep. And I know that was so instrumental for my business and what I was doing. And a lot of the things, like even down to you said the way that you do one thing is the way you do all things, even down to the presentation booklet for, marketing to listings and taking care of people in just a little bit different way was just so profound. And I mean, you took me on appointments and hearing you speak to people, it just was like, wow, this is relational business. And I mean, quite frankly, is how you've built all of your businesses. What are you working on now? What are you tinkering with now these days as far as business? You mentioned technology.
For sure. Yeah. And to your point, I mean, I remember that, to your first point, I remember that fondly, right? I think there's a statement of well, I'm just kind of the general understanding that like usually people would rather teach than do. And but
Sure.
I also believe so there's kind of an influx of a lot of people that want to give knowledge but haven't actually done anything. They've just
Mhm.
maybe learned something. And I'm a big believer in after you've done something successfully, communicating that, which is why I went through this season. You mentioned at the beginning of the call, worked with quite a few people and had some great experiences, and then kind of got the itch to jump back into something. And
Mhm.
because I think once you're an entrepreneur, you're always an entrepreneur. It's
Sure.
kind of like a masochist a little bit. Like you have to get absolutely obsessed with the thought of failure. And I heard a statement that entrepreneurship is kind of like chewing glass. You either have to love the pain or love the taste of your own blood. But it's kind of like what it is, right? But
Yeah.
but to the earlier point, um, just because somebody did something doesn't mean that is how you do it. It means it is
Sure.
one way to do it. And the best thing about communicating and building those types of relationships um, is it can allow both parties to think a little bit differently about the problem. Because usually the answer is somewhere in the middle. This is one way to do it. And perhaps there's a way that's not working. And then there are different iterations. And through the iterations comes a solution. And so to those of you listening, if you're looking for, relationships with people like that, I highly recommend talking to some people. It doesn't have to be like a paid, coach or consultant or something. I mean, sometimes it's incredible. You've got systems like Academy 18 that are
Mhm.
awesome that can compartmentalize knowledge and say, hey, there's a few specific standards and here's how you can do those exceptionally well and grow a business. And I wish I
Mhm.
had stuff like that when I was in real estate.
Sure.
And then you've got other things, just like people that you care about in your life that
Yep.
perhaps can give you some insights, right? So, um, yeah, I think very fondly on that, and it's been wild seeing what you've done and what you've built. I think it's awesome.
Thank you.
Um, but to answer your second question, kind of what we're doing now. So when I was in real estate, I had this thing that kept happening again and again and again, which is I would hire people
Mhm.
and I would train them and they would do really, really well in the training environment. And then they would go out into the world and they would lose business. And what happened is the only metric to know if our training was working or not was employee success or failure, which ended up costing us tens of millions of dollars over the years. And what I realized is that fundamentally stems from the fact that there's no tools in the market to ultimately understand how training is interpreted, retained, and applied by teams. The companies really have to rely on three metrics, which is if training was completed, the average quiz score, and the average progress through content, which really doesn't tell you anything. And so at the same time, over the last few years, I started developing this thesis that the future of technology was adaptive, right? So tech tools will use your data and AI to understand who you are, how you work, and will conform to meet you and to where you're at, meet your needs instead of forcing you into conform to a rigid system. And
Mhm.
so it's kind of that thesis, that problem that really made me believe that the best sandbox for testing this thesis is in corporate learning tools. So inputs are standardized, outputs are measurable, and it's a ritual that's done every single day, millions of times a day when you vectorize across all the companies in the world that are training their people. And so on that ideology, we started building our company now called Basewell, which is an adaptive learning platform that uses AI to understand how people learn and produce. It'll automatically conform to the trainee's learning style and environment, and at the same time collect that data and report it back to employers. So your employer can understand all of the intricacies about who you are and how you work, and will be able to more accurately support you in a way that you need. And you will be able to be trained in ways that properly support your learning style, your goals, and ultimately what you need to do inside of an organization. So we really see it as the future of technology that we're pioneering, and it's been a hell of a ride so far. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Heck yeah, dude. That is awesome. And I think a nugget to take from that, because for some people that's super intriguing and cool, and for some, like, who gives a crap,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Like,
sure.
technology is
Absolutely.
not a space that I'm going to play in, right? Like, and that's fair. But I think the point to pull from that, the concept, the lens at which we kind of digest what you said, um, I think is ultimately, for me, I hear that as like, or for any agent out there right now,
Hmm. Hmm.
lender that's like, man, of course the agent's a little, the market is a little wonky
Yeah.
and rates are here. My client base is doing this. And we could spend the next 3 hours about looking inward and have
Oh
you been
yeah.
doing the work? Have you been taking the action? And then, like, no, have you really, really, really been trying? And for most people, loaded statement,
Yep.
hot take. For most people, the answer is no, absolutely not. They've not been
Sure.
doing everything, right? Which in and of itself is too ambiguous. What is everything? Okay, so
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
3-hour conversation for later, but
For
to
sure.
pull from that, I think whether someone is able to plug in through Basewell and the analytics, or whether that's through Academy 18 or another coaching platform, or even training or mentorship, the idea, and I'm sorry for such a long explanation into what we should pull from this, is that you have to apply what you learn, right? Applying is built in somewhat into the retention of learning those things, right?
Yep.
You can't go, archery is huge for me. You can't go be told how to pull back a bow,
Yep.
be given the instruction for where to place your nose and your hand and your hand on the bow itself. You can't be told one time and then be like, all right, cool, you're on your own, you got it, take off. Like, there is repetition that needs to happen. There are things that we need to go over again. I find myself in a season of it's not even really doubt. It's just a season of like unknown. At certain points, every day is an unknown, but like these seasons of like, man, I wonder what that's going to be. I wonder what this is going to be. Well, so-and-so said this, the news said this. What do I listen to? What do I pay attention to? Social media said this, when in fact, it's kind of like, go back and do the things that were working. Well, it's 2023 and I got my start back in 97. Well, I guarantee you we were better at connecting voice to voice and face to face better than we are. I mean, then better than we are now.
Sure.
So those things are still working. We have to take the action, take the step, ask ourselves those tough questions, because for me, I mean, not to just drone on, but it's like the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? Like, I try so hard every year to get new hunting properties. I try so hard every day to find an investment property in all these different areas for things that are going to move the needle in my life personally. And yes, taking care of my agents, serving our staff, serving all of our people and the vendors that we get to work with, all of that is at the highest priority and above hunting and above finding investments for myself.
Yep.
But I have found over and over, time and time again, I spent most of the summer with no, and heck no, and no response, and on and on and on, to in the last 3 days, I've picked up 2 additional hunting properties that equate to probably 300 acres. I'm not equipped to take on 300 acres right now. So now there's a new game plan. How do I do that? Well, the same is true in producing leads and lead generation. You have to go and go and go and go some more and take no and take the back seat over and over and over again until finally it's going to kick out a result. And usually, Evan, it kicks out more than one. Would you agree?
I would. And there's a few things that you said that I think are important to take away. The first, you started this whole thing with just the difference between what I call theoretical and actual data, right? Theoretical data is developing a thesis, right? It's I have an understanding of, I mean, heck, this entire conversation is kind of theoretical when you get to it. Like, hey, I've got this, I'm a new agent. I'm going to do some business planning. The first thing we talked about, I have this theory about what's wrong in the market. I'm going to do it better. And so even if you follow this train of thought, which is surprisingly linear, which is awesome because you and I are just on the same plane, from the entire conversation we've had so far, it's all theoretical.
Sure.
I have this theory about what's wrong. I have a theory people are going to care about the solution, right? The biggest failure of companies is not just doing something people are attracted to or building something people want. Like the number one failure of companies outside of just founder enthusiasm and willingness to stick at it is just the fact that you've done something that no one cares about, which is a really hard truth, but you get that through actual data. And what I mean by that is, yeah, it's hitting the phones and it's, doing all the things you need to do to generate leads. I would recommend being relational instead of transactional with lead generation, which I won't get into now, but that fundamentally means building long-term relationships. There are some relationships in real estate that I built for multiple years that took years and years and years and years to pop off. And some did, and some referred, and then some didn't, but everybody felt appreciated. And that's important. Now, appreciation doesn't drive revenue, but when people feel appreciated, they're going to refer other people that are looking for that type of service. That creates vested relationships. It's a deeper value. It's easier to get referrals, drive business. The flywheel gets going much faster. It just takes like 3 years, right? So all of that to say, theoretical versus actual, that To understand and contextualize how what you're doing is working or what isn't, two things need to happen. The first is you need to be absolutely, rigorously, relentlessly real. So the question that you should be asking yourself, I do this actually every Sunday. I sit down and I have kind of a planning session for the week. So, my business is called Baseball. I literally ask myself this question every Sunday. Does baseball need to exist this week? Yes or no? And when I was in real estate, I did the same thing. Does my company need to exist this week? Yes or no? Not need to, like, for your family. Like, the question is deeper than that. It's like, do people actually care? If so, what do they care about? If they don't care, why do they not care? What specifically is pushing them away? Like, really get into that with your business and be asking yourself, like, does this business need to exist this week? Do people actually care about what I'm doing? That is the question that you have to answer in order to build a sustainable business that you can one day support your family, or really support your family, or exit. And B, that is only gathered through actual, like you said, once you start pulling a bow, it's very different than learning how to pull a bow, right? And for those that have actually pulled a bow, the first time you do it, you're going to snap your face and it hurts really bad. And then you're going to learn, right? So, but that's actual, not theoretical.
Sure.
And so what I would recommend is that the best thing you can do is just get back in the trenches. And be willing to take a few punches for a long period of time. Because when you're doing anything hard, like Les Brown says, if it were easy, everyone would be skinny, rich, and happy. Like, there's a reason why there's an uphill battle, is because not a lot of people cross the hill. Sure. And once you get over that, you'll have enough information to be understanding, okay, do people want what I'm doing? Do people, are they attracted to this? Right. Yes. And you know the specifics as to why. And going into like 24, 25, 26 Q4 planning, you can start to understand, okay, this is what I need to double down on, and this is what I need to stop. But yeah, I think that's a great thought. Really important takeaway.
Love it. Love it. Well, hey, man, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the in-depth answers, for your knowledge, your education. We're going to go ahead and make this a wrap here. We're going to be done. For those that are watching, as a reminder, we have the kickoff of back to our weekly calls during the work week. That is tomorrow at 10 a.m. And so Kyle and I will be on. We're super excited to see you guys. Evan, thanks, man. Always great to hang out with you. Always great to talk with you. We will talk to you guys soon.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.